Today's episode is a masterclass in consumer reinvention. Freestyle is now one of the fastest growing diaper brands in America, breaking into mass retail, winning next to Pampers and Huggies, and building a product that parents rave about for its performance. But just 2 years ago, the business was plateaued, the original thesis wasn't working, and Russ had to make not one, but two major pivots. This conversation is the blueprint for founders stuck in that seven-figure purgatory, where velocity isn't compounding and incremental funnel tweaks won't save you. Russ breaks down how to know when it's time for a true product pivot versus iterating your way into oblivion, why Freestyle shifted from a bamboo-led sustainability narrative to SkinShield, a total re-engineered core built around what parents actually value, performance and clean ingredients. A crash course in Retail 101, 12 to 18-month sales cycles, the myth of instant scale, and why crawling before running actually creates better long-term outcomes. The strategy behind entering only a handful of retailers and why winning narrowly beats being everywhere. How Freestyle is taking share from incumbents with nine-figure budgets and why generational shifts in parenting behavior create openings legacy brands can't see. And their disciplined approach to working capital, margins, and surviving long enough to get a shot at the next category review. Welcome to In the Money, an exploration of whether you can still make money in D2C and CPG. We talk to some of the most interesting $5 million to $50 million founders, operators, investors, and acquirers in the space to ultimately answer the question, is D2C and CPG still a good business? Hope you'll enjoy the show. Russ, as we kind of wrap up 25 and go into 26, it's been your best year ever. Growth is skyrocketing. You've got tremendous product market fit. Customers keep coming back for the product. But a couple of years ago, it wasn't that way. And so I kind of want to start today with some of the learnings and takeaways around the pivot. You've actually pivoted twice. And maybe the question is, you took a pretty big swing and it worked. For those brands that are in that maybe seven-figure range like you were, but aren't finding velocity skyrocketing, what's the inspiration and what's the takeaway?
Early on, when Mike and I started this business, we were aligned on trying to prove a point that mattered to us personally, right? And I think this will relate because ultimately coming back to that helped us figure out what we needed to do. We're both dads, young-ish, you could argue, and felt like we were approaching parenting personally in ways that were different than the traditional views of sort of moving to the suburbs behind a white picket fence, putting on khakis, and taking the obligatory beach picture, and white shirts. And we actually had a slide on our investor presentation that was like, "This is everyone else," because you'll find a million examples of those, and we want to be this. And this other side of the story was, I don't know, just sort of people who looked like they were doing awesome things, or had tattoos, or were playing sports, or were singers, or And so I think that having a North Star, in other words, that was personally meaningful to us, helped us just remember and perhaps even have less emotional investment in any specific tactic, product, or offering. And so when, early on, we started as a dad product, and when it became clear that market, just wasn't really going to support a sustainable business, but then we had to go back to all right, well, yes, we're two dads and we formed the company as dads and it was all about dads, but what of that can we peel away and what can we keep and still be true to ourselves? And then if we let go of that, what doors does that open? And ultimately it opened the door towards diapers, which, that was our first pivot, was going away from dad's supplements effectively to diapers, which necessitated a total rebrand because you can't be just a dad diaper, right? And the second pivot away from, or I would say towards a new version of our product, that was really about how do we kind of increase. We knew that with our first product, which is a bamboo tech product, sustainable, bit more premium in price point, excellent performance, top-notch quality, ingredients, but a little more. It didn't speak to, through polling, the top values that young parents had, which was really performance and cleanliness. Even though Bamboo Tech was a clean diaper, we were overpaying on the COGS standpoint for the sustainability angle, which mattered to us personally, but wasn't what the market was necessarily looking for. And so being willing to step back and say, okay, well, what if we sort of let go of the need for it to necessarily be a bamboo story, and we still had some sustainable elements, but we stopped talking about them and focused more on the performance and clean side? What would that product look like? And I think we were just fortunate to have enough time to explore that kind of thinking. But I would say that was the guiding approach.
A lot of brands in that situation then or even today might say, okay, I'm going to just keep iterating of like, I've got this 7-figure revenue business. That's a real business. We just need to get the right funnel magic, the right ad. I'm sure I've also recorded a ton of pods where, that's the advice, but you did make this big product pivot. Yeah. How did you, I guess, maybe get the courage or conviction to say like, hey, this bamboo thing isn't it. We're going to go to this more product solution oriented product.
So the iteration was from Bamboo Tech to the new SkinShield product. And the key difference between them is that SkinShield is a completely different core of the diaper. The inside pad is just built differently than any other diaper. And the and that was not the intention out of the gate though. The idea was we needed to come up with a product that felt like it had more mass appeal, that also candidly that retailers would respond to at the mass retail level. There's there was a bit of a challenge with bamboo in mass retail just because of some FTC decisions about how you market bamboo products that made it, I think mass retailers are not as receptive to it as perhaps natural grocery, where that's more of their bread and butter. And so we knew, okay, constraint number one, we want to be a vendor to mass retail partners, and then constraint number two, we need to create essentially the best performing diaper on earth at the same price as Pampers and Huggies. So, all right, let's remove then bamboo and see if we can go do that. And then with the help of our engineers, we were able to pull that off. And that was tremendously exciting. So I think it was, again, like the driving thinking was, how do we over deliver for our customers in a way that they're telling us they care the most about?
And is that in itself a lesson that after 15 years in consumer, of course, there are the trendy brands that catch a moment and get to 9 figures, and that's amazing. But consistently, the problem solution or the performance oriented, like this just functionally works objectively better than anything else in market. They're just the better bets.
I wonder, right? I mean, we have a sample size in diapers of really just 2, and one was a marketing angle that was Hello, I would argue, was really about the story of who the founders were, and this one, it's a product angle. This one feels more sustainable. I do think there was a bit of it didn't feel like a 100-year brand at Hello, I'll say. That didn't seem like what that brand was standing for is true for parents and will be for 5 more generations. I think that is true at Freestyle, or at least that's what we hope to be, sharing with the world. So I'd like to believe that, hopefully on sample number 3, if I did a chance to do this again, I would probably stick to that same approach.
AI. Everyone's talking about it, and you're worried you're getting left behind. Meet RichPanel, an AI-first customer support platform that's built for one thing: making support faster, smarter, and cheaper for e-commerce brands. Something you can actually feel smarter about using. RichPanel combines a unified inbox across email, chat, and socials, a customizable self-service portal that customers actually use, and Sidekick AI, which learns from your past tickets to suggest on-brand replies. Does it actually work? Well, with RichPanel's guarantee, you get guaranteed 30% cost savings when you switch from Zendesk or Gorgeous, 30% automation to reduce your ticket volume, and a no-risk guarantee that if RichPanel doesn't deliver those results in 60 days, you get a full refund. That's why top brands like Ridge Wallet, Jones Road Beauty, and Pella Cases are already using RichPanel to save hundreds of thousands in support costs. Time to start letting AI work for you. Head to richpanel.com and start your free trial today. Real savings, real automation, and real AI that actually works. You talked about that you always envisioned Freestyle being in mass retail. Obviously, that's still today by far where most diapers are bought. Maybe we can go through either your retail journey or kind of the 101 on retail. You come from a sales background, mostly in software. Maybe let's start with the quick journey to date on retail.
I stupidly left AI in 2015, right? So, I guess caveat everything I say with that, the knowledge that that's kind of decision making I'm capable of. But when I first got into CPG, it was at Hello Bello, where I got the chance to learn the ropes from some really experienced folks. And it's number one, it's a completely different vocabulary, different line of thinking. Everything is, it moves on 12 to 18 plus month sales cycles for the most part. So you really have to you get one shot per year to make an impression. or, to incorporate feedback from that shot and then wait another 12 months and do it again. So, I think that was really surprising to me when I first got into the space, coming from software, where it felt like even with long sales cycles, you really still had like a lot of bites at the apple. And then I think it's, on the flip side, the realization, that these can be huge markets. I mean, at HelloBello, I'd never seen a company take off the way that company took off. And I don't know that team gets enough credit for, just how successful HelloBello was in its first like 6 months. We went from launching in February 2019. Granted, we had a huge relationship with Walmart, with all doors on day one, but we were profitable by that summer and profitable for the full year after 10 months in operation, and, well on our way to 9 figures in sales for the year. So, and that's
Incredible.
crazy. So I think that blew my mind. And then I would say there's a third element that candidly, it itches at me, like, which was nobody in my family had any idea what the hell BD for software was or what AI was, but people understand, like, it's tangible what a pack of diapers is. And there is something a little more satisfying, in talking about what you do. And, when you can actually point to the product on shelf and be like, oh yeah, I had something to do with this element here, or, I designed, or, I was part of the photo shoot for that. So I know that I've always thought is very gratifying about retail, but it has nothing to do with the sales process necessarily.
We had the CPG investor Anna Whitman from Coefficient come on and talk about how they strongly encourage, and I think this is actually echoed by a couple of other investors that have been on the pod, to start more slowly. I think she specifically said, they like seeing brands crawl, walk, run to really get that data. And maybe you missed that 1 year window, like you said, because you missed, the buying decision for this year, but you're getting the data, you're driving velocities in a tighter distribution window that you can invest more in. You talked about HelloBello getting to 9 figures in year one in Walmart. So quite the opposite approach. What has Freestyle learned about that spectrum of distribution, and speed?
You're saying back to me what I said about the sales cycle. Definitely reminds me of how, like, it has felt we've been at this for 5 years, right? And sometimes it feels like you just need to survive. Like, if you can just, because you missed that window and now you just got to survive for 12 months. And how do you show up at that next meeting smarter than the last time? How do you show to the buyer that you've evolved? Hopefully the product has evolved and the brand has evolved. And you can't just do that based on gut. It has to be data driven. So that becomes the exercise, right? And so I think we probably spent, I don't think it's an overstatement to say that we spent the first 3 years of the business just learning. Wherever we could get data, we'd get it. Let's run a survey with the 10 customers who bought in the last month. Like, man, it's a tiny sample size, but it's something. And then let's compare that to like a poll fish. Let's pay for 300 and see if that's the same. And is there a learning here? And what report can we buy? And you're spending that time getting smart. Mike and I are not natural, or I would say to this day, even particularly great D2C marketers, right? So it's not like we had that to lean on. So all we had was our, kind of analytical, research-driven focus to try to show up, just prepare for and get ready for that next meeting, and spend all our time in between, either fundraising or making that pitch as good as it can be.
You've been pretty selective in key retail partners to work with. We see some brands that are in 8, 9, 10 retailers, multiple key retailers, but then maybe end up struggling either through the operational complexity or the working capital challenge, or not having the dollars to support all those programs. Is it now a kind of pretty conscious decision to keep the number of retailers pretty tight so you're winning at all the accounts?
I would say the truth is that, we probably would have accepted, more growth where we could have found it. I don't want to pretend like it's always retroactively, like, fully controlled. But I will say that now having some optionality with this new product, there's definitely a conscious decision to, like, just make sure that we can overperform for our partners, because they're taking, big bets on us too. And we're fully cognizant of the demands that it places on, retail partners to take on a new vendor, and the trust that they place in you. So you absolutely have a responsibility to live up to it. And I think, in terms of working capital, I mean, you have to be really smart about your model, right? I think that's one thing that there's a lot of lucky sort of experiences that I had along the way to, what I hope is a, continued great success story with Freestyle. But One of them was having a chance to, to run an accounting and CFO business and really see inside, it was probably a couple dozen startup CPG brands, and just understand what those founders were good at, what they weren't good at, what are the things that they focused on, and did that translate to success 6 months later, or did the ones who said they focused on this, end up not doing well? And you do get a pretty good sense for, you don't have to by any means be some spreadsheet wizard, but you definitely need to get a strong understanding of, COGS, of what margins are, and then, forecasting your balance sheet so that you make sure you have enough cash on hand to be able to actually order the product that you promised to your partners.
The diaper market is dominated by a couple of pretty large incumbents with very large marketing budgets. You're next to them on shelf and winning. How are you doing that? And how do you think about communicating your edge?
I think the market in diapers, I believe, is more open even than when we first went at it in Hellabella, and I think actually materially so. I think we have, you have to give credit to luck when it's due. I think we're fortunate to be building a new thinking diaper brand in this moment rather than 10 years ago, when perhaps retailer and, incumbent relationships were perhaps more scarier than they are today. You know what I mean? Like they had some levers they could pull that made it very difficult to enter the space that I think they have less of a grip on today. And I think that's because of a change in generation of who the buyer is. I mean, the average age of a parent is 26, 27, and it probably will be for a long time. So what that means is that it's a different generation every 10 years that's buying diapers and having babies. And new generations today, and there's plenty of studies that show this, just think differently about legacy brands, about parenting, about getting older. And I think that does require some reflection on shelf of brands that speak to these new, lines of thinking. So that, I think, is a main driver of us having a chance at all. So market dynamics, new generation of buyers. And then, the third piece is just, in our case, having an exceptional product. Our retention rates at retail are off the charts. And then that's because if you touch and feel and try this product, the new SkinShield diaper, it's just so much more absorbent, so much softer, checks all the boxes on clean materials, and it's at a fair price. And so that's really we're counting on effectively, the equivalent of free CPMs around, just like people touching and feeling and sampling the product or hearing about it from friends and realizing like, oh yeah, this is absolutely the best value on shelf.
If you're running operations for an e-commerce brand, you know how hard it can be to keep fulfillment running smoothly as you grow. As your e-commerce brand expands into new markets and channels, logistics only gets more complex. So how do you make sure your fulfillment solution actually helps you scale? ShipBob is a modern fulfillment partner built for fast-scaling e-commerce businesses. Their hub-and-spoke network lets your business store inventory and ship from over 60 fulfillment centers across the US, the UK, Europe, Canada, and Australia, giving you flexibility to reach new customers and reduce cross-border complexity. Their dashboard shows real-time inventory across every location and channel, giving you a clear view of what's where. That kind of global network advantage helps streamline your operations, improve delivery experiences, and support expansion into new markets. If you oversee operations and want fulfillment to work for you, not against you, visit shipbob.com/podcast for a quote. That's shipbob.com/podcast. People talk about this J curve when it comes to profitability into retail, that in the kind of first 2 to 3 years, they're willing to have it a break even or low contribution margin, potentially even negative channel, because they really want the buyer to be happy. They want the awareness to be there from a consumer standpoint, and expecting that, years 3, 4, 5, and, onwards, that they've got that foothold, that all the reorders are coming in at a much higher contribution margin. How do you think about how much to invest in the channel?
I mean, I think we think similarly for our size, right? I mean, there's not a ton that we can invest to keep it going negative for too long, but we absolutely think about over delivering for our partners to make sure that, this is so much of the game is just staying alive and staying in front of customers. And so what we want to do is give as many new parents a chance to find and try Freestyle. And it's less important to us that we, make a quick buck off of that initial purchase, and more important to us that we build the 100-year brand story that there's this new option in diapers of like a sort of a Nike, a performance-driven, modern brand, clean design, speaks to parents and not to kids. And it's going to take a minute for that to settle in. So I think in our category that strategy of the J curve is particularly relevant just because it's a truly essential product. Customers are going to buy a diaper. It's virtually guaranteed if they have babies, obviously. And then, and as long as you can put a great product and give them the optionality to give that a try, you should have long-term success, and you should be willing to bet on that, which is what we're doing.
To stick with the theme of letters, from a J curve to a K-shaped economy, I feel like K-shaped economy has been one of the most talked about things this year.
Yeah.
The last few pods, people have brought it up as well. This SkinShield diaper that you're in market with, drives premium performance, but you've still got value based pricing, my words, not yours. But kind of one of the takeaways about the K-shaped economy is that there is a ton of price elasticity at the top of the curve, that people are feeling very comfortable with the discretionary spend. So how have you thought about pricing and, hey, can we get that extra little bit of margin? Because if people are happy with the product, they'll just keep buying it.
I think there's absolutely a segment of new parents that are interested in a sort of a luxury brand and story and a bit of a public nature to that, so that there's you can sort of demonstrate that you bought the top quality or at least the top advertised brand. I mean, I think in our case, we feel great that we outperform all products from a re-wet or an absorption standpoint, as well as softness and cleanliness. And so we're not trying to be a small segment of the overall market. We want to be there for all parents. And I say that not because we're just like benevolent. I mean, that's where the majority of the diapers are sold. And so we're interested in building a big business that has staying power. And I think that's the risk with perhaps trying to niche yourself at the top part of that K. I think we're in a trade down economy for the next year or so. And I think also consumers are really smart. I mean, the truth is, this is one thing we've realized, is that the consumers you can reach through Meta and Google advertising are extremely discerning. And they have a very strong sense of whether or not they're getting value out of what they're buying when you're talking about them as, sort of writ large. And what all of our studies and surveying have shown is that, there are plenty of consumers that, of course, you can afford that extra 20 cents for, this sort of it product in our category. But, if it doesn't actually offer anything meaningfully different, or in fact is meaningfully worse, then, what does that say about you that you continue to buy it? And I think that we're starting to realize people sort of waking up to that you don't have to have a trust fund to get the best diaper, right? I mean, there's a lot of great options out here. And maybe some of this is just about, marketing and sending influencers on cool trips. And that's what my extra 20 cents is paying for, as opposed to something that relates, personally to me.
In software sales, maybe you're conscious that all the seats are using the product, so you get the renewal next year. In retail, you actually have to drive the velocity, trade spend, promos, driving digital to in-store. Maybe what are some tactical learnings that you've had from driving sales?
I tell you, it's not a direct answer out of the gate, but the understanding that driving velocities is perhaps one of the most sort of arts of the process rather than science, because there's no attribution for the most part, for at least for any of the levers that you can pull immediately, right? The thing I can do today, if I want to try to drive more sales, is buy more ads somewhere, somehow. And I have no idea whether that's going to drive an in-store sale or not. I can have a pretty good idea, but sometimes. But then, by and large, it's a bit of a flyer. So, the thing that we've realized is being there, having a strong community game. I know that's what a lot of people say, but it absolutely has worked for us. Having a true IRL presence where people have a sense that this is a real community, this is a real bonfire that I can get around, right? And so Freestyle is a thing. There's people who buy Freestyle. The people who buy Freestyle are like me. I like those people. And, we all sort of hang out at the same places, and that drives that kind of continued retention and repeat purchase. Just because we're serving that community in a way that is satisfying to them, which is ultimately all that matters. But more, sort of true tactics to drive in-store velocities other than the obvious levers of discounting and, in-store marketing. It's been tough. I think we do mostly the same things that others do. We just do our best to stay as authentic to what we're trying to say.
What else are you doing to cultivate that community?
We have a lot. in the works next year as well. We've always envisioned Freestyle as like the, sort of, it's kind of a strange analogy, but almost like a Red Bull of the category, right? Like we should be at scale as much a content and events company as we are a diapers and wipes business, because becoming a parent is, for a lot of people, the biggest change that they go through. And it can be a massive cultural shift, although we would argue it doesn't have to be. It's a pretty big deal. And so, there's a lot of great stories that you can tell around how people have made that shift. And so we're going to be releasing a lot of new content next year to try to just demonstrate that we are real parents. We've been through this process ourselves. We know what this is like. We don't have a lot of sacred cows in how we talk about it. We're fully willing to sort of talk about the upsides and the downsides of what that has felt like for us personally, and hope that it resonates. And I think that, when we've done that at small scale with, we have community tools like TYB, and, we have mom walks, and, we do like free coffee for moms in communities just to try to meet our customers. And when we essentially describe our attempts to sort of make parenting feel authentic and like a real tribe, it definitely seems to resonate.
Let's talk a little bit about operations. What did you insource versus outsource early on, and what would you do differently about it if you're starting today?
For the longest time, up until really a year ago, it was basically just me and Mike. And so I would I would do it again that way if you have the good fortune of having a great partner, a business partner and co-founder that you can truly rely on and that you can trust. Then I think that can be all you need for a long time. The challenges in that phase are staying motivated, continuing to believe that it's real, treating it like it's real. And so I think if I'd had to do these things on my own, I don't know that it would have been possible. So insourcing a co-founder is probably the most important. Beyond that, though, outsourcing was great for us because we made a lot of mistakes in terms of what we thought. Oh man, I have been sold so many times, maybe because I'm originally a sales guy, or at least I was for a while. Sales guys are the ones that sell. Like you have a problem and man, like magic, someone will pop up in your inbox with a consulting fee that promises to solve that problem. And it's very tempting, and we fell for that pitch so many times. And thank goodness it was a consultant and not like a longer term commitment to that role, because, oftentimes it turned out like, oh, we just needed a little bit of training and now we can let that go and we can do it ourselves. So I would argue in favor of, giving yourself the optionality, to work with consultants and then just try to keep the full-time team as core and as strategic as possible for as long as possible. Also because when we made mistakes in the other direction and we hired folks, and made a commitment to them to be there as their livelihood, and it turned out we couldn't keep that commitment, that's just heart-wrenching. It's not who you want to be. And I think it takes a long time to be a stable enough company to really be able to honestly make those commitments.
Why do we love Numeral? Well, here's the good, the bad, the ugly. The good is that over 2,000 e-commerce store owners just like you use them for sales tax compliance, including brands like Grunz, Graza, Ridge, and 8 Sleep. The bad is that none of us got into this to spend a ton of time on sales tax and admin, which is why Numeral is able to help you in 5 minutes or less get full coverage, deal with registrations, ongoing filings, and compliance. It all just happens in the background. And the ugly is that not a lot of store owners know that sales tax is actually personally guaranteed. Said another way, that the states could end up coming after you personally if you're not on top of it. Even being a modest $5 million store owner, you could have nexus in 20 to 30 states. Again, Numeral helps you stay compliant, and they even guarantee their work. That's why we love them. Go check them out at numeral.com. What's been the single biggest win of the last year? New hire, operational milestone, something else?
Yeah, I think our expansion into mass retail, that was a major game changer for our business when we launched SkinShield at Walmart. Planning to make more announcements next year around this. And I think, that's always been the dream. And that was a deal 5 years in the making, right? Like it took a lot of at-bats that we were fortunate enough to even get that far, and a lot of swings and misses. Which, you could argue we were fortunate to do those too. I think we've been really good at, I guess, just taking feedback, you can't argue with feedback from a key customer. It's like, they're not giving you feedback, they're telling you like it is. And so it's up to you to, just to either respond to that or to never go get that deal. And I think it took us those rounds of feedback to get there. But yeah, no, that deal, the Walmart's been such a great partner, and they really took a risk with us, and I think it's worked out extremely well for both sides, and massive, massive game changer for the business.
Maybe we'll talk a little bit about capital markets and where investors are kind of rounding out 25 going into 26. There does seem to be a good amount of enthusiasm. There have been a number of $500 million, $2 billion exits within kind of consumer products, especially fast-moving consumer products in the last 12 to 18 months. I'm curious if, you've felt that enthusiasm paired with the momentum that you're having and whether it does feel quite buoyant in the market.
For sure. We're not pursuing any kind of strategic deals, so we just see it from the fundraising side. But yeah, I mean, good grief. 2021 to 2023, trying to fundraise. We used to have a saying in enterprise sales, maybe it's common, you're pushing rope. You can't push rope, it has to be pulled, and man, investors were not pulling at all. And so it was really tough sledding for a long time. And I feel like now there's been some good data points. Sometimes I wonder if, if it has to do with AI in some, like sort of indirect way. Is it helping industries like ours that are completely AI proof? Like there's no AI that's going to change a baby's diaper. So, it's not going to eat our world, at least from the physical goods space. And I think maybe that's, investors are starting to realize like, oh, wow, we need to have some bets placed in something that is, not directly related to, the fortunes of AI or chips. That's just a guess, but yes, no, it's meaningfully different. But again, we've had some good fortune in closing some big deals too. So it's hard to differentiate like between overall market and then what we like to think is our own success.
Yeah, that's amazing. You talked about the growth of channel into mass retail, but is there a tactic, a process, a piece of tech that's working especially well for you right now?
One thing that I think we do, that is it's not a tool, it's just a spreadsheet, but we have we week by week, every week, just lay out our key stats and how those have changed. And that includes retail stats, like things that you can't get in a triple whale dashboard. And that's been super valuable for us. Just even the process, it's almost like, Mike and I call it like founder therapy, just going through, finding the number, typing it in, thinking about how that was different than when you typed in a week ago. And then you see the diff, and then you look at it in a line chart, a basic line chart in Google Sheets. I mean, that to me is the most valuable operational tool that we have. And then the 13-week, that's just, forecasting out our cash balance to make sure that we don't run out, which is a venture-backed company sort of motion that has to happen. I think those are the two tools that honestly are like have gotten us this far. In terms of other, we get IRI or like point of sale data reports. Those help a lot for understanding the competitive dynamics, which products are selling well. You have to kind of, infer why they might be selling the way they're selling. And, but it takes a lot of hustle in my experience, and, maybe we're doing it wrong, but in my experience, it's not like maybe this is a good thing about the category. There's no one place where everybody has access to the exact same reports and data. And so everyone's seeing the same things in the market. You really have to like network and grind and piece things together in your own way. And, and that gives a chance for alpha. And I think that's been our approach.
It's so interesting about the analog process of manually keying in data and allowing the synapses to fire in a way that you don't get just by reading your daily dashboard report, which is where I think everyone is moving, right? Everyone's just like, okay, there's a dashboard for everything, and everyone's got a proprietary dashboard. Then every software company's trying to build that proprietary dashboard so it's common for everyone. But there's still something to be said for keying in that data, just to be so on top of it and understand it backwards and insides and out.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've always had this philosophy. In the early days, we did have all these tools, right? And we probably overpaid for some tools that we didn't even need. I mean, certainly we did. And yeah, it abstracts you from the data. And so you just kind of looking at a chart and you're not quite sure where it came from. And we've had this philosophy since then of being like, look, it's not about being absolutely right. I have no idea if this is the true number of paid purchases that I got. And I'm not sure anyone truly does. But what I do know is I got it from the same source, and it's the same place I dragged it from, I don't know, 100 weeks ago. And so I feel very confident about relative data. The absolute data, I don't know. But I don't need absolute truth. I just need to know what my trajectory is. And it's deeply satisfying to scroll back 5 years week by week and then to compare. And we often do in our sort of leadership Slack channel and be like, hey, look at this. Like, 3 years ago today, this is where we were and this is where we are today. Isn't that wild? So it's nice.
That's really cool. Russ, as we head towards a wrap, is there anything that you're looking for from listeners, channel partners, collaborators, investors to accelerate Freestyle's next phase of growth?
Candidly, I think it's, other than a product pitch, I don't know. We feel very fortunate to be where we are. I think we're going to hit the scene in a big way in 2026. It would be very easy to find and try Freestyle. And I think, we believe deeply that we've designed the best product you can find anywhere. And so if you're in the market for diapers, give Freestyle a try. And then obviously if it doesn't work out, email me directly and I'd be more than happy to take care of it.
Amazing. Russ, thanks so much for coming on and look forward to next time.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks so much.